Hello again and welcome back to another episode of Adding Game Sounds, where today we're going to pick up from where we left off in the last lesson, where we added loads of sounds, UI sounds, to the pause menu in this game, but the only thing we didn't do is attach the sliders that control the volume of the music, the sound effects, and the general volume of the game, the master volume. We didn't hook them up to FMOD, so they, at the moment, don't really work. So that's going to be the plan for today, to get them hooked up so that we can interact with them in the game and control our volume, or let the player control the volume. Before we start, don't forget to check out scottgamesounds.com if you want to sign up to our newsletter, find out what's going on, if I'm releasing anything new, or if I'm, sometimes I share audio tips on there. That sounds like something you'd be interested in, then just come to this website to sign up. Also, if you're interested in copying the script that I'll be creating in this video, you can come to Resources, Scripts and Assets, go FMOD and Unity, and then just scroll down this page, find the video that you want to use the script from, just click on it, and there you go. You can just copy it into your project. Simple enough. Okay, time to get started. First, let's quickly play our game. Let's just remind ourselves what we're actually doing today and take a look at the audio menu in question. Okay, so I'm in the game. This is Zone 4. This is the only zone so far that we've got sound effects and music added to it, so I thought this would be a good place to do this in. If I click pause, and then go Options, Audio, here we are. So these are the sliders. So we've got one for the master volume, one for the music volume, and one for the sound effects. But unfortunately, they don't do anything at the moment. So that's what we're going to fix today. Now, normally when making these videos, I like to set everything up first and then show you what I did. But I'm going to try and challenge myself today. I'm going to do it all from scratch and see how we get on. Okay, so I know the first thing you need to do is go into FMOD. And we need to go to the mixer window. And this is where we're at in terms of mixes so far. We haven't really done much. We've got two buses for the music events and the sound effects events. I also actually need to add a new bus because we've got some new events from the last video. All those are UI sounds we need to add to them. And yeah, what we want to do is basically control the volume of the music, sound effects, and the master bus as well. Before I do that, let me do what I've just mentioned. I'm going to quickly come to sound effects, right click, and go new group. There we go. And then I'm going to call this bus UI. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those events at the bottom and I'm just going to drag them onto that bus and add them to it, just like that. There we go. There we go. So now we've got a separate bus within the sound effects bus just for UI. The reason why I've done that is because it makes things a little bit easier when it comes to, say, adding reverb for like real world sounds or sounds that, are diegetic and need to be coming from the actual game. It makes it a bit easier to do that, to add reverb to those sounds and not the UI sounds by separating them. So what actually I could also do is create another bus and we'll call this in game. There we go. And then all of this stuff that's going to be played in the game, I'm going to drag that into this bus. There we go. And that organizes our sound effects bus a little bit. We don't really need these for what we're doing today. It's just whilst we're here, I thought I would do that and set ourselves up for future videos. Anyway, like I said, what we want to do is control the volume of these buses. Now, what we're going to do in Unity is we're going to hook up the game, or those sliders, to VCAs. Now, we could hook them up directly to the buses, and that would work, but that kind of makes things a little bit awkward when it comes to mixing, because what would happen is, say we come to mix our project and we go, okay, we want the music there, sound effects there, this bus there, da 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 da. When we start to then give control of these sliders to our player via Unity in the menu, they'll start to, interact with these sliders directly and kind of mess with the mixing, basically. Whereas if we create some VCAs, which, let me undo all this, and I'll do that now. Let's create a new VCA. What we can do is assign the VCA to one of these buses and let the player control this instead. And this will give them control over the final output, I suppose, of each bus without messing with the mix. So it just separates the two. It separates your control of the mix and the player's control of the balance of the levels in the game. So it's just a bit of a more organised way to do things. So that's why we're using VCAs. Now then, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by just setting up the master slider first. So we're going to control the volume of the master slider with this VCA. Let's rename it, and we'll just call it master. Then what we want to do is assign buses to it. Now, unfortunately, you can't assign the master bus directly to a VCA. So what you'll instead need to do is assign the group buses that sit directly underneath your master bus. I.e., if you close up all your buses, so let's say you came to your mixer and it would just look like that. Close up all your buses, so you've only got, you know, everything's minimized. These buses here are the ones you want to assign to your master VCA. To do that, you just right click and go assign to VCA, master, and do the same thing for this bus. There we go. So now what will happen, let's click on the VCA here. So now what will happen, if we start, or if the player starts adjusting the volume of this VCA, the volume of both the sound effects and the music buses will drop, but these faders won't. So we can keep, so our mix will stay kind of relative to the mix, if that makes sense. Anyway, like I said earlier, it just gives, it separates the control between us mixing and the player. So now we've got that VCA, let's save this project. Let's press F7 to build our banks and jump into Unity. Right, now you'll remember from the last lesson that we can access our menu, and more specifically the audio menu, by going to prefabs, UI prefabs, and then options canvas, I believe. There we go, and then we can, well, I've already done it. I've opened up the audio canvas. So now we can interact with the master slider, the music volume slider, and the sound effects volume slider. So I suppose what we want to first do is create a new script, which we're going to add to each of these sliders. So let me just go back to 2D Game Kit. I'm just going to find a folder to create the script in, just to keep this project organized. And sometimes I've screwed up in the past with these videos where I've just made scripts and not put them in a folder and then lost them. So I'm going to make sure I do it this time. I'm going to call this script Vca Controller. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the master volume slider, and then I'm going to add it to, oh, whoops. Oh, I've got two for some reason. Oh, that was me just messing around beforehand. Right, let's get rid of that. Okay, so master volume slider, scroll down, and let's, oh, whoops, if I can. All right, let's add the VCA controller to this slider. There we go. So this is the game object that basically is representing this slider, right? And we know that because it has this component called slider. This is a Unity specific component, and it pretty much does what it says on the tin. This is the slider, okay? Now, the two parts that we're going to be interested in for this video is this value field here. If we take a look at the master slider in the scene tab, if I move this value, you can see the slider changes. So this is the value of the slider, right? So we obviously want to hook that up to our FMOD fader. I'm just going to put that back to 0.9. And also this Unity event here, on value changed. So using this, we can trigger a function, which we're going to create in a bit, to do whatever we want it to do. And it will be triggered whenever this value field is changed, right? So as I'm sure you've worked out by now, whenever the player moves this slider and therefore changes the value represented by that slider, it's going to trigger a function in our script, which we will in a minute tell to change the volume of our VCA. Now we can ignore this component here, mixer slider link. This is basically Unity's version of controlling buses and stuff and mixing. Doesn't look like we can get rid of it, so I'm just going to leave it minimized like that and ignore it. Right, so let's right click VCA Controller, open it up and start editing. Now the first thing we're going to need is a VCA variable. So we're going to do that by writing private fmod.studio.vca, and then we'll give it a name. I'm just going to call it, well, I guess I'm just going to call it VCA. There we go. So this, it works the same sort of way as event instance variables, where we write fmod.studio.event_instance, then give it a name. And then this, well, not event, because Unity doesn't like you naming things event. And then this we can use to represent one of our events in FMOD, right? And then through that we can tell it to play, stop, start, whatever. But this time, instead of using, we're not interested in events, we're interested in VCAs. So we write fmod.studio.vca, give it a name, and then using this we will control our master VCA. First, though, we need to hook it up to this VCA specifically. So what we're going to do in the start function, so on the very first frame that this script is activated for, and basically when the player opens up the audio menu, we're going to write VCA is equal to fmod unity dot runtime manager dot get VCA, I believe. There we go. So the get VCA function is our way of hooking up this variable we've created to the VCA we created in FMOD. And it looks like that. And it works by simply giving it a string. So again, with events, whenever we're trying to hook up an event to an event instance variable, we'd write something like this. Not actually in this function, not in the get VCA function, but in the, I can't remember what it is now, create instance function. We'd write event in quotation marks, colon, / and then the name of our event. So let's say it was called jump. Oh, whoops, not with an 8 in it. We'd write it like that, okay? So we're going to do a similar thing for VCAs. We're going to write in quotation marks, VCA, colon, / Then what we could do is we could write the name of our VCA, which is master, and then boom, we're hooked up. So now, once we turn this script on, we will be able to control the master VCA through that variable by interacting with the VCA we created. And actually, to make things a bit clearer, I'm going to change the name of this. I'm going to call it VCA Controller. There we go. Just so we can specify the difference between this and the actual VCA in FMOD. Now, we're not actually going to do this. What we're going to do instead is we're going to create a public string variable. And then what my plan is to use this same script on all three. Why is this called? I've just noticed VCA Controller 1. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. I guess I accidentally duplicated it. Anyway, we're going to use this script on all of our sliders, or those objects with slider components on them. So the same for the music and the sound effects. And we're basically just going to change some of the fields that we add to this script so that we can use it on all three sliders, and it works for all three sliders. And we can say hook the sound effects slider in the game to the sound effects VCA, which we're going to create later. So to do that, let's first create a public string variable, which is a variable that can hold characters, letters, and stuff. We'll call it VCA name. And we won't do anything just yet. Then what we're going to do is we're going to change the path. Let's get rid of that bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to write VCA colon / and then add VCA name. Then let's quickly save this actually, and I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to save that, go back into Unity and just wait for this to update. There we go. And then you can see, so VCA name has now appeared in the inspector tab because it's public, right? So now this is where we will write the name of our VCA, which was master, right? So now it's written here, going back to our script, it will include that name in the event path. So now we're telling, again, we're telling our VCA controller that we want you to be hooked up to this VCA specifically. So like I said, what we can do now is later on, add this same script to each of these sliders here, and we'll just write a different name. So once we create a sound effects VCA, we'll write sound effects, and it will hook up each slider to the correct VCA. Right, the next, what else do we want to do? Next thing, let's get a reference of that slider component. So earlier I mentioned how this component here, slider, was important because we need to know the value that it's set to. Well, we need to get a reference of it in order to interact with it. So what we're going to do is we'll write private. Oh no, hold on, but I've just forgotten. In order to do that, because this component is part of Unity's UI collection of components, in order to find it, we have to include the new namespace. So I'm going to write using Unity engine.ui. There we go, like that. Otherwise, you can try and create a variable of the slider type, but it just won't work. That's why we need that. So if I type now private slider, so you can see how it's recommended me this class called slider. It's only able to do that because we've added this namespace here. So don't forget to do that. So it's of the slider type, and we're going to call it just slider because I can't think of anything else. Then in the start function, again, as soon as this script is activated on the first frame, we want to get the slider component, right? So in the same way that we've assigned, let's go back to FMOD. In the same way we've assigned this VCA specifically to this variable, the VCA controller, we want to assign this slider component to this variable, specifically the slider variable. So let's write slider is equal to get component slider. There we go, and that's that. Right, I think the next thing we want to do, and I might be making a mistake here, but if I do, I'll correct it later. Next thing we want to do is basically create our own function. If I go back to Unity, remember how I said using this Unity event here called onValueChanged, we could trigger a function? Well, what we're going to do is create our own function that will change the value of our VCA, right? Or its position, the slider itself. By slider, I mean, go back to FMOD, this slider here, fader, I should say, not so that we don't get confused. This is a fader, and, oh, I'm getting jumbled up. This is a slider, just to be clear. Okay, so let's do that. Let's get rid of the update function, because we're not going to be using that. Right, let's call it, well, first this function needs to be public, I believe, so that the Unity event can find and access it. So we'll make it public. Void, it's not going to have a return type, it's just going to do a specific thing. Let's give it a name. So let's say, I don't know, volume change? No, I don't know, a better name. Let's change it to set volume. There we go. Cool, there we go. So we have a function. Now, I think what we need to do also is whenever this function is triggered, we want to pass basically whatever number this is into the function for us to use and set to our VCA. So let's create a parameter variable. It's going to be of the float type because we're using decimal points, or numbers with decimal points, I should say. And we'll just call this volume, I guess. I hope these names are not going to confuse us later on down the line. I'm really bad at naming variables. Then, in order to actually set the value or the volume of a VCA, we need to use another new function. So first we write the name of our VCA variable, which is controlling our master VCA, which was Vca Controller. Then we write dot set volume, and then in the parameter brackets is where we want to give it a number that we want to set the volume to. Now I'll just quickly explain roughly how the set volume function works for VCAs as well as buses. Basically anything in the mixer window that has these faders. Once you build your banks, let's say, well, we'll leave it at 0. Whenever you build your banks, these positions on these faders are going to be represented by the number 1 in Unity, or rather in FMOD's API. So at the moment it's at 0 decibels. Well, that's going to correlate to 1 in Unity. So if we use that set volume function I just showed you and say, okay, set the volume to 0.5, what that's going to do is bring the fader to about halfway down. So roughly about minus, what is that, minus 20? Minus 20-ish decibels, maybe a bit less than that, roughly between minus infinity and 0, basically. Then if we said change it to set the volume to 0.2 or 0.25, that would be a quarter, so that'd be about here, right? But let's say we edited FMOD and we actually left the fader at about minus 10 decibels and then built our banks so that they passed them over into Unity. Well, now 1 would represent minus 10, so if we were to set the volume to 0.5, it would be, the fader would be pushed down to halfway between minus infinity and minus 10, wherever that is on the scale, right? Does that make sense? So wherever this fader starts at, that's going to correlate to 1 in FMOD's API. I want to make sure this is just left at 0, okay? Anyway, go back to our script. What we want to do is pass the volume, again, so that volume variable that's in these parameter brackets, let's go back to Unity, that's going to be holding this number here, the value, wherever our slider is. And the slider ranges between 0 and 1, as you can see here, the min value and the max value. We're going to pass this value into the function via this, and then we're going to set the volume to whatever value that parameter holds, okay? Right, now whilst I think we still need to do more with this script, I'm going to save it there, and we'll move into Unity, because now what we've created our function, we need to hook it up to this slider component. Okay, so let's come to the onValueChanged Unity event. Let's click plus to add a new event to it. First, we need to give it a game object that has the script attached to it that has the function that we want to trigger, which is just itself, right? It's the master volume slider game object. So let's drag that over here. We've used Unity events before, so I'll try and, if I can find it, I'll have a little card in the top right corner showing you where I talk about these in a bit more detail if you're unfamiliar with them. Then we want to find our function. So let's click function. Well, first we need to pick the script that has the function in it. So let's go Vca Controller 1. Right, and then we want the function. So the function is called set volume. Now, as you can see, we've got two options for set volume. We've got set volume under the category dynamic float and set volume under static parameters. Now, I believe we want to use this one here, And the reason why is, well, actually, let's click on it and find out. Yes, I think that's right. So what this should now do is it will pass the value, because it's dynamic, it will pass that value into that function. If we, let's go back to it. If we used this one here, we'd have to manually set the value that we wanted to pass into the function. So we'd have to write, 0.5. But obviously, we don't want to manually do that because that defeats the whole point. The idea is that this is dynamic and the player can control it. So let's go back and we'll make sure we select set volume under dynamic float, just like that. Let's save this prefab, options canvas, and yeah, let's give this a test. See if I've made a mistake. Okay, so we're in the game. Right, let's pause it. Let's go options, audio, moment of truth. Let's now turn the slider. Let's turn the slider down. Hey, it worked. Wicked, we have control. Okay, so something I want to test. So it obviously started, so the slider when we started the game started at 1, despite the fact we were looking at it and it said 0.9. I think there's obviously just some script in this game that tells it to start at 1. Whatever. That should then change the slider anyway. What I want to test is if I turn this, say, halfway down. No, actually, let's turn it really low down. Okay, so we can barely hear. Let's turn it a bit up. Actually, that's too quiet. There we go, about there. So we can barely hear anything. Now what I want to do is I'm going to go into the next scene, and I want to see if this change carries over between scenes. It's a little bit hard to tell because we don't have any music in this scene, but it sounds like it has. These sound quieter. In fact, tell you what, let's just do that. Let's turn it all the way down and then go in between scenes. Okay, so let's move over to this scene here. Yeah, I think it worked. Okay, so great, brilliant, that works. And by the way, when I said change between scenes, if I quickly go back to 2D Game Kit, scenes, these are each of the levels, right? They're represented by Unity scenes. So this one we're looking at here, this is zone 4. So whenever we moved off to the screen, we went to zone 3. We were going backwards just because I've started us halfway through the game. Then when I went even further to the right, we went into zone 2. So those were basically scene changes. Thankfully, if we go to 2D Game Kit, let's go back to our prefab. Let's see. Actually, no, I'll tell you what. Let's not go to the prefab. Let's go to Scenes, UI. Now, you remember in the last lesson I mentioned that for all the menu stuff, there's a specific prefab that sort of holds all the game objects that make up the UI. So the sliders, the buttons, etc. Well, that prefab can't be found within any of the scenes, right? Or rather, any of the zones. So level 1, 2, 3, etc. Instead, it's found in this, its own scene called UI menus, right? Sure, let's save. If I quickly open up, you can see it's empty, right? But all it's got is this prefab of the options canvas, okay? So whenever we press pause, we're kind of loading this scene on top of whatever other scene we're in. So say we start in zone 4, we pause it, we load this on top of zone 4. So we've got 2 scenes running at once. And I guess because this, once we've loaded this scene up, it carries over. It's never sort of unloaded, if that makes sense. Whenever we change between zones, say zones 4 and zone 3, the changes aren't reset, which I was a little worried that was going to happen, that the slider would jump back to 1, or even that the slider would stay where it was, but the volume would reset. Thankfully, that hasn't happened, so I think we're all good. Anyway, let's make our way back to zone 4 for some more testing, shall we? Okay, here we are again. So let's now go 2D Game Kit, prefabs, UI prefabs, and options canvas. So we can actually, there we go, open canvas. So we can actually edit the game object itself. Cool. Right, so we got the master slider working. Next, let's go music volume slider, and let's do the same thing. Let's go add component and Vca Controller it was called, wasn't it? Vca Controller 1, because I screwed up somewhere. Right, so we want to do, okay, so we're pretty much, what we need to do now is create a new VCA for the music. So let's go back to FMOD. And what we're going to do is create a new VCA. We'll call this music. Oh, not like that. We'll call it music like that. There we go. Then let's go back to our routing so we can look at all our buses. Right click on the music bus, assign to VCA music. So you could assign a bus to more than one VCA, by the way, and it will still kind of control the levels appropriately. Cool. And that's that. Then if we go back to VCAs, you can see now we have a new one for music. So let's hit Control S to save. Let's press F7 to build our bank files into Unity, so we can now access these in Unity. Then let's go back into Unity. And in the VCA name field, we're going to type in music, the name of the VCA we just created. And I guess that's it, isn't it? Oh, no, it's not it. We need to also do the same thing we did. We need to hook up the Unity event that triggers whenever the value of the slide is changed. We need to assign our function to it, basically. So let's do the same thing. This time we're going to drag the music volume slider object into it. Then we're going to go function, music slide link. Yeah, no, sorry, VCA controller. Same again, same function, set volume. There we go. Then let's hit Control S and save the prefab, and let's play the game. Right, so pause, options, audio. Right, now let's turn this music slider down. Hey, there we go. So we don't hear the music anymore, but we still hear all the sound effects. Wicked, right. Now there's one more left. So same again, options, canvas. Let's now go to the sound effects volume slider. Let's add our favorite VCA controller script. Oh wait, no, we also need a VCA. So let's go back to FMOD. Let's create a new VCA and we'll call it SFX. Then we'll go to routing and we will assign sound effects to it. There we go, that's all good. So let's hit Control S to save and F7. Jump back into Unity. Let's type SFX into the VCA name field. Then we'll use the onValueChanged Unity event, drag over the game object that has the script attached to it. Select the script, select the function, save the prefab, and play the game one more time. There we go. Okay, so now let's pause, options, audio, and sound effects. Turn you down. So now if we interact, you can hear all the UI sounds are now gone because remember we assigned those to the UI bus, which was then assigned to the sound effects bus at the beginning of the video. And yeah, we can play the game without listening to any distracting sound effects. Listen to these funky tunes. Ooh, baby! What we can also do, let's go back to the pause menu quickly. We can now kind of balance everything together. So we could say, let's bring the sound effect back in. Let's say we want to turn it down a little bit. It's a bit loud for our taste, but we want a good amount of music, but just a little bit of sound effects. We could do that. But what if we want to go the other way around? Let's say, not so much music, we want to soak in the environment. Let's turn the music up a little bit, actually. There we go. And now we can hear I've forgotten how to shoot in this game. There we go, now we can hear the sound effects. Now, one more thing I want to show you. Whilst I thought we'd have to use this in order to get this to work, but we didn't need to. But I'll show you it anyway. What I'm going to do is create a new... I'll make it... I'll tell you what, I'll make it private. Make a private field. This is going to be a float variable, so it's going to hold numbers that have decimal places in them. And I'm going to call this, I don't know, I guess VCA volume. So let's call it VCA volume. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to add an attribute to this field. I'm going to say serialized field. So this is a private variable, so we won't be able to access this from any other scripts, which is fine because we weren't doing that anyway. But because it's serialized, we will see it in Unity's inspector. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write in the start function. So again, as soon as this game starts, or as soon as the menu's opened, I'm going to go VCA.get volume. No, sorry, not VCA volume. I want to use the name of my VCA variable, which is controlling the actual VCA and FMOD, which so it was VCA Controller. Then I'm going to write dot get volume. Actually, I've just noticed something. The fact that we've accidentally called the class or the script itself VCA Controller 1 and this variable here, VCA Controller, actually worked out quite well because now we can separate the two. Probably a bit confusing to use the number 1 there, but whatever. Because you may have noticed as I typed in VCA Controller there, it sort of was wondering if I wanted to use the... Oh, it's not going to do it again. It was asking if I wanted to reference the class itself or this variable. So I guess that's something to bear in mind. Try not to call your class and your variables the same thing. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. Let's now write get volume. So this is kind of the opposite of the set volume function. This is what this is going to do. This is going to look at the VCA assigned to this variable. Go back to FMOD. It's then going to look at wherever the fader is, and it's going to give us a number representing that position. So remember how I said wherever it starts, whenever you build your banks, that's going to be 1 basically. Then wherever it moves from there will be a number based on that starting position. Well, this will give us that number. It's just so if we want to test to see, you know, what's going on with the faders, or maybe if you want to do something creative with that number, maybe you want to use that for some sort of mechanic. I don't know, you tell me. But anyway, what we're going to do is use get volume, and we're going to pass the number into that float variable we just created, Vca volume. Oh, and to do that, we need to also use the keyword out, because the number's sort of coming out of the function, whereas before with the set volume function, we were putting a number into it. Because it's coming out, we have to use the out keyword. What I'm also going to do, so at the moment this will only give us that number whenever the audio menu is opened up, right? Let's also get that number whenever it's changed as well. So every time, you can't just write this function once basically and expect it to constantly give you the number every time there's a change. You have to also update it whenever that change has been made. So we're also going to add it to the set volume function, which as we know is triggered whenever a change is made by the player. Then let's save the script and jump into Unity. Right, oh, I can't roll my tongue. Right, that was a bit better. Let's go to the option canvas and let's go open prefab, I guess. Let's click on master volume slider. There we go. So now it's just going to show us a number basically representing the slider's position. Let's come out of the prefab now. Let's just make sure, I don't know what you've set yours to, but I'm just going to make sure I'm not maximizing the game screen when we play it, because I want to see the actual, what I'm going to do is select the menu within the inspector, oh sorry, the hierarchy tab, so we can see that value. And let's click play. Okay, let's open up the menus. Right, then let's find it. So let's scroll down. Oh, actually, oh yeah, here we go. So here you can see it is a separate scene, like I was mentioned earlier, from the main scene, zone 4. So let's open up the UI menu scene, then open up the canvas object, the audio canvas, background, yeah, just open that up. Then the master volume slider, scroll down, and there we go. So now it's been set to 1. That's great, because the values are 1, the VCA slider is also at 1. Now if in the game we turn the volume down, there we go, we can see that number change. So that might be just a handy way to test things and make sure things are working for you. If we go all the way down, it goes to a really no number. Let's close that. Cool. And then if we go into a new scene, again, I just want to make sure that the changes are being saved between scenes. Let's then open it up again, options. Oh, let's open it up in the game first. Audio, there we go. Audio, canvas, BG, master volume slider, there we go. So the number's still there, the number's still the same. Great, and I think that's everything. That was actually a lot easier than I thought it would be. So like I said at the beginning of the video, if you'd like to copy this script, you can do that by going to scottgamesounds.com. There'll be a nice space here, or somewhere. There's probably, it depends on when you're watching this video. But you'll find on this page a link to the script. Saves you copying it from this video. You can just copy and paste it from a text file. And yeah, if you want to watch any of the other videos in this series where we basically add sounds to this game using FMOD and music, you can do that. I'm sure I've probably thrown a load of links to all sorts of stuff throughout this video in those cards in the top right corner. So yeah, feel free to check them out. And of course, don't forget to sign up to the, oh, it's gone now, the Scott Game Sounds newsletter. And yeah, let me know if there's anything else you want to see from this channel. I'm actually at the moment struggling for video ideas. So yeah, any and all recommendations or feedback or suggestions would be really appreciated. But yeah, that's everything. I've been Henry Scott. Oh, and also let me know what you thought of this style, where I kind of create things on the fly instead of making them post or pre-video, I suppose, and then explaining them later on. Let me know if you preferred me just kind of going through it and explain things as I go through it. Yeah, I've been Henry Scott. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.